On to tiny mic. Okay, got it. I'll get that off this. Hey, Kari, if you can go to the computer and take that notification off the screen, the computer on the silver table. No, the one, yep, there. Awesome. And you can just press got it on that notification. That would be great. And I've opened up the Zoom and I will spotlight myself. Usually there's two of us doing this, so bear with us. All right, looks good. Great. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Wikipedia Edit-a-thon facilitated by Amber Berson. We are joined today by Sarah Turner's Advanced Seminar in Environmental Science students. Welcome all into the space. And these students will be working towards together creating an article for Wikipedia from scratch, as far as I understand. Amber, of course, is here to provide participants with some hands-on skills, but also to underline some critical issues associated with writing for Wikipedia. So we're really pleased that you were able to join us from home today. Amber, I know you've got a full schedule and some sick kids, so thank you so much for being here. We are coming to you live from Concordia University's Fourth Space, located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Fourth Space, we facilitate daily activities that allow for knowledge sharing by focusing on what Concordia community members and their collaborators are working on in terms of research initiatives, and in this case, of course activities. So we're super happy to welcome you all in. Given the meeting structure of this event, I'll remind you to please go ahead and turn on your video when you'd like to participate, if you have a question or comment. And I'll reiterate that I've left some mics around the room for you to use so that Amber might hear you on Zoom. If you rather not turn on your video, that's also an option, no problem. You can use the chat and just communicate with Amber via text if that's easier for you. If there's anybody out there watching this on YouTube, welcome in. If you'd like to participate, please feel free to make comments or questions in the chat there, and I'll relay them to Amber in Zoom. Okay, that's it for me. Housekeeping done, and I'm passing it over to you, Amber. Hi.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be back at Fourth Space and with you, Sarah, and with your students. I am going to share my screen now. Let me know if you don't see it. You're good? It's screen? Okay. So first of all, hello, my name is Amber. You can find me on Wikipedia as username 13AB37. I'm coming today with my art and feminism hat. I've been working at Art and Feminism, an organization that works on bias and gender and race on Wikipedia for about 8 years now, and I'm coming with that hat on. I'm also coming as a former Wikipedian in residence at Concordia and as a former board member at Wikimedia Canada. So I'm coming with a good bit of knowledge about how to work with Wikipedia, but also how to make it a more equitable project. We'll talk a bit more about that. So some legal stuff, I will give you access to this PowerPoint. I want you to have a copy if you have any questions, but if you want to share it, you're welcome to build off of it, but it is my PowerPoint, so please credit me. And then also it's a living tool, so links that I put in yesterday might have changed today. We'll see how that goes. Our plan for today is to look at some of the ground rules, just what is Wikipedia and what it can and can't do. We're going to look quickly at how to use Wikipedia, so a little like quick tutorial, but I know that all of you have some basic training already. We're going to look at adding images to the commons and also how to add content to Wikidata. And then we're going to follow up with feminist and anti-oppressive methodologies for Wikipedia. So first of all, Wikipedia is not an encyclopedia. It is an encyclopedia, but it's not proprietary. So it's not, it doesn't belong to Encyclopedia Britannica. It doesn't belong to one person. If you put content in there, it's no longer yours. This is particularly useful today as we co-write this new article. None of you will have any kind of like academic title to this. It's got to be written from a neutral point of view. So that means that even though we're all really passionate about the things we're writing about for Wikipedia, it's often the reason we are engaging with it. we have to write with the utmost neutrality. And so even if there's things that we don't agree with but appear in secondary sources, it's our responsibility to be neutral to that concept. But I'll talk about how we can still like navigate that from a feminist or anti-oppressive standpoint. It's free. Anybody can use it. Anybody can distribute it. Anybody can edit it. But that doesn't mean everybody does. So we'll talk a bit about who does and doesn't and the problems within later on in the presentation. And then the final pillar of Wikipedia is that we treat each other with respect and civility. And we're going in with the viewpoint that like we're operating in good faith. So I like to share this slide usually because when people talk about sources, they often talk about Wikipedia as being a bad place to start your research. And I love this because as an educator and as somebody who's very invested in Wikipedia, I obviously don't agree. I think Wikipedia is a fantastic place to start. It tells us so much about how people think about a particular subject. And because we have the ability to see the edit history of any article, we can see how that information has evolved over time, major debates in the field. We can see where knowledge has changed and shifted. We can also go in and see, for example, how subjects differ based on geography or language. So I disagree about it not being a good place to start, and I hope you all will too, if you don't already. But I think the major reason that people think about Wikipedia negatively is because they misunderstand what it is. Wikipedia is a tertiary source, which means that it's like a dictionary or an encyclopedia. It is absolutely not a secondary source. So like a scholarly article or something published in a journal. And it's definitely not a primary source either. It's not a memoir. It's not archival material. When people go to Wikipedia, they're often treating it like a secondary source. So they're assuming that you can cite it in the same way, but it's meant to be a summary. And so that's helpful to keep in mind when you're writing today, but it's also helpful to keep in mind when you're sourcing it. So we've talked a bit about neutrality, but we really want to think about what we say and not including editorial bias. So I can give an example. Ada Lovelace is probably one of the best known women historically to work with computer technology. She's the inventor of code effectively, and of the binary. So she had her article for a long time starting with that she is the daughter of Lord Byron. Now this is true. It would be problematic to remove this information, but it is also true that that is not the reason she's worthy of a Wikipedia page. So when editors went in to update her article and maybe make it a bit more relevant to what she has accomplished, there was a lot of back and forth about whether it was problematic to not remove Lord Byron's presence, but to move it into like personal life. So it's important that even if you have strong feelings, and even if you're operating with a feminist and anti-oppressive methodology, you do so with like a neutral position. We've talked a bit about it not being proprietary, about it not being something that belongs to you. If you are attempting to write an article and you want to cite something that's already that you've already written, for example, for a blog or something else, you still have to cite it as if it's a secondary source. You can't just copy and paste. The bots within Wikipedia will scour it and remove that information. And let me know if you have questions, because maybe not everybody knows what those bots do. But ultimately, what we're thinking through is you don't own this. Nothing that you put on there you can extract and put into your own knowledge or your own publications later. So we're not publishing original thought. The way I like to describe this is that if you are amazing and find a cure for cancer, congratulations. This is not the place to publish it, nor is it a place to summarize the publication. It's so it's not a place to like explain how you've found a cure for cancer. That's the secondary source. It's really a place to say like Sarah Turner did this wonderful thing. Good for her. It happened on this day. You don't want to edit in conflict of interest, though. So if you have a relationship to anybody, either familiar, financial, romantic, you don't want to edit anything that you'd have that kind of relationship to. That doesn't mean, however, that you are banned from working on content through a job. So for example, when I was a Wikipedian in residence, I could still edit content related to Concordia as long as I disclosed what my conflict of interest was, as long as I disclosed my relationship. So if you were to edit today on a subject that was near and dear to you, but maybe you're already working in, you have some kind of employment relationship to, you'd want to disclose that on your user page. So in general, Wikipedia covers notable, oh, it's going too fast. It covers notable topics, so things that have gained a significant amount of attention by the world at large over a period of time. But notability is really, really hard to determine. And we'll look at an example a bit later on about how there's a lot of bias in notability. So you need a certain amount of secondary source material that's verifiable by the Wikipedia community. And the way that these two ideas are determined can be quite biased in and of themselves. So notable means that there's a certain amount of secondary source material from reliable sources. But what the reliable or verifiable sources mean is that it's been determined or predetermined by the Wikipedia community. And I'll show you that sometimes notability guidelines reproduce the same structural sexism and racism that we see elsewhere in the world. So for example, if we have somebody who has great amount of success in their field, but there's very little written about them, then the quantity of sources might not represent the reality of the situation, or the quality of the sources might not represent the reality of the situation. In the arts, I like to talk about Canadian Art Magazine, which until just this past month when it shut, was the most important Canadian arts publication on contemporary issues in the country. And often it was reported that editors would remove links to that because it wasn't considered an important or verifiable publication because it wasn't included on the list of reliable sources. That list is determined by the community through a consensus process. And that process means that if you don't participate, you have consented to that process. So if you don't voice your dissent, it is assumed that you're okay with what is included there. However, these processes are really hard to locate on Wikipedia. You'd also have to understand how the wiki code works as opposed to the visual editor. And you'd have to have a certain amount of edits under your belt in order to participate in votes. So these lists of reliable sources have often been determined by one community. In English Wikipedia, it's a very male, very North American focused, very Anglo-focused set of determinants. In French Wikipedia, we see a huge emphasis on sources that come from France as opposed to the larger francophonie. And so you have all this bias built into what determines whether the source is reliable, whether the person is notable, whether the subject is notable. I want to call your attention to this report that was released earlier this year about the reliable source guidelines in marginalized communities. It may be of interest to you as you pursue this work, and it's free and on Art and Feminism's website. So before I said that you want to act in good faith, but it doesn't mean that you don't come across issues sometimes. So one such issue might be that you use a source and you know that it's a reliable source in the community in which you are working in. So for example, I believe today you're working on issues in Borneo. Well, you might be referring to publications that are hyper relevant either to the discipline or to the location, but they're not included on these lists. If somebody says that doesn't count, what do you do about it? Well, you assume that they're operating in good faith. You can have a conversation with them through their user page. They might be operating with not enough information to make that decision, or it's possible that they actually know that there's a better source out there, in which case they can offer it to you. In general, that tends to work, but when it doesn't, good places to reach out to are the Tea House, where you can ask more generalized questions. You can enter into a dispute resolution process, and you can also reach out to places like Art and Feminism, or you can reach out to Wiki Edu, who are there to support you through these kind of like painful experiences, because it's deeply frustrating to have somebody who probably has less knowledge about the subject delete your work when you have more knowledge, but maybe less experience incorporating that into Wikipedia. So what they're effectively doing is is like tone policing. They're telling you, you are not right because I don't like the way you're saying it, as opposed to you are not right because you don't have the knowledge. So we're going to go into a bit of editing right now. And so I know you all have usernames. And what I would love, and I'm going to try and make it so I can see all your faces at the same time. What I would love is for you to go and turn on your visual editor if you haven't already done so. If you can, like, through a microphone, I guess, let me know how many of you have the visual editor already on, and if anybody needs help with this, that would be helpful. Because I can only see one screen.
So Amber, you're just seeing the view of the room of the students, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So if any of the students feel like turning on their cameras on their laptop, you can speak to Amber directly using those mics.
And you don't have to, but if you need help doing this, I think it's going to make our day a lot easier. So if you haven't done it, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. We can come back.
Should we move on,
Show
folks?
of hands, like a thumbs up, anything. Okay, I assume you're all great. All right. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do, thank you for that one person who put their thumbs up. I appreciate it. The next thing we're going to do is think through some of the way that bias.
Sorry, Amber. Hi.
Yeah.
Sarah. I'm not
Hi,
sure.
Sarah.
Does everybody know what Amber's talking about? I think people are a little lost.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's go back. All right. So there's two ways to edit on Wikipedia. The first is to use Wiki markup code, which is a proprietary code, but open source. It's a bit like HTML. The second is to use the visual editor. Most new accounts have you opt into the visual editor right away. But depending on whether you're using a new computer, whether you haven't logged in for a long time, whether you're using a language other than English, you may have to manually turn on the visual editor. And so if that is the case for you, what I want you to go into is in the top, into, like, I think it's user preferences. And then you're going to click on editing. And you're going to scroll down.
Do they do this in their Sandbox? Sorry.
No, they do it in their account. So there's user preferences. It's next to Sandbox.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go to the top next to your username, you're all logged in. And then there should be like a preferences. Do you see it? Yes, I see one thumbs up. Great. And we can come back. We can go as slowly as you need to. If you click on editing and you scroll down to the editor area, you can show me both editor tabs. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here, show me both editor tabs at the very bottom is what you want to click on and save. And then without closing your preferences, I'm also going to encourage you to give Wikipedia some information about you. So one of the goals of Art and Feminism was to encourage more non-cis male users on the platform. And we based our stats off a 2010 survey that showed that only 10% of editors identified as female. But the data was updated much more recently. And in fact, it's now only 16%. So there hasn't been a huge increase in that time. However, part of that increase is because of actions like this. So if you go into user profile under preferences, you can let Wikipedia know who is being described when editing Wikipedia. And this helps count some of those. It helps increase those numbers of who edits Wikipedia. You can also do all sorts of like fun and exciting things like change your time zone or whatever. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. I can only see one of you nodding, but I'm moving on. So I think you've done some work on Wiki already, but I want to talk about an anatomy of a page. So every page is publicly visible, but also every edit is publicly visible. There's nothing you can hide from Wikipedia. And while that might feel like kind of daunting when you're editing or creating a new page, it also means that nothing you do can break this platform. There's always going to be a person or a bot who's going to make sure that what you're doing is, like, in quotations, kosher. They're also there to make sure that you, like, theoretically aren't putting in n'importe quoi, just like nonsense. So there's like some very fun artistic interventions in Wikipedia where people have put in poetry or have gone in and inserted art projects. That's all very interesting, but it's not what we're doing today. So it's also important to know that that will be edited out. So this is just a Wikipedia article page. This is what it looks like when we click on the View History tab. So this is the history of a page. How many of you are familiar with this? How many of you check this regularly? Sarah, awesome. So it tells you like a great bit of information. So for example, it tells you who made the edit. So Delusional Thomas 515610 tells you when. It can also tell you what they did. So if you look in the final columns, you can see updating the comments category, update portal link, modified template. When we're looking at who did the edit, we can see whether they're a regular user or a person who maybe has less experience. Delusional Thomas 515610 doesn't have a blue link. You'll notice their link is red, which means they haven't taken the time to create a user page, which probably means they're not an extremely active user. But if you're curious if they are or not, you can click on contributions, and that will tell you everything that person has ever done. If you clicked on talk, it will allow you to communicate directly with that person. When we're looking at dates, it's really helpful to see, is there a period in which there's a lot of activity on a subject? So there was, like if there's an oil spill, is there a lot of activity on the pages about oil or oil spills or the particular location where it happened? Is there suddenly a link out into a new page for that particular disaster, et cetera, et cetera? When we're trying to understand somebody's reasoning for making an edit, when we look at their contributions, we might get a better sense of what they typically edit. So once I had somebody delete a page because they felt like the artist in question wasn't important enough. But based on their contribution history, it seemed that they had a lot of knowledge about lizards and very little knowledge about Canadian art. Now, that doesn't mean that their knowledge about lizards is invalid, but it means that maybe they're not the best person to determine the notability of the subject. So when we're thinking about the bias baked in, it's important to think about who we're working with and the community we're working within. That person was a really active editor. They knew a lot about Wikipedia, but they didn't necessarily know about the subject area. So it allows you to engage in those conversations with a little bit more fluidity. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. When we click on editor, this is what it looks like when you use the visual editor, but just for a quick reminder, this is what it looks like when you use the code. So the code is not like particularly difficult. It's fairly easy and intuitive to learn, but it is another learning step. It's like learning a language. The code is what you have to use if you use MetaWiki, so the overarching project for Wikipedia. So if you want to communicate in, let's say, a deletion process, or if you want to communicate in the politics of Wikipedia, you'd have to know this. And so it does further alienate and it creates more division. Once you've created an edit, whether it's on a new page or a page you're creating, it's really important that you describe what and why you did something. The reason for that is that when we looked at that revision history, it showed us who did what. It helps us to shorthand find things. It helps the bots understand what's going on. And it also helps you manage to know what you've done. You can click on minor edit if it's just a quick little, like, you inserted a piece of punctuation, something like that. You can also click on watch this page, and then it will become a starred page at the top of your screen. So next to preferences and your username, there should be a little star up there. And that lets you see everything that you've worked on previously or that you want to continue watching. If you're unsure, and this is great as we go into the editing today, about your changes, you can always show preview. You can see what it's going to look like. This is very useful if you're working in code, especially. Now, I assume all of you have already done this, but our first edit could be to work on your user page. So at the tops of your pages, can you give me, maybe in the chat, a show of how many people's user pages are blue and how many are red? Who has taken the time to create this? All of you? I'm like peering into my screen as if I might see better into the classroom, but I will not get a better sense just by like squinting.
maybe a show of hands or something. You could see people raise hands.
I think so. I can see some of the people. I can't see everyone.
Yeah.
Has anyone created a user page? Raise your hand. Okay, so I'd say that's the majority. So we're going to skip this. Thank you. Okay, so today we're going to work in one sandbox. So Sarah, you had asked a question, how we're going to go about doing a collective edit. We're not going to create 14 sandboxes. We're not going to try and work against each other. We're all going to work collectively. So that doesn't mean that you're working all on one computer necessarily. You could be working in a Google Doc to start. You can be having one sandbox open. So perhaps on Sarah's computer, that would be the best place to do that. And we'll sort of divide into like who will do what in a bit. But the sandbox, if you haven't already used it, is like a very nice place to try out material. It's effectively creating a draft that's visible to you. It's semi-findable, which means that it's not immediately locatable, but it's a good place to like play around, try things, test out a thing before you make it public, before you move it from a draft into the public space for revision. So we're going to move now to why it's important to do this work. Only 10% of editors, like I said, identify as women, either cis or trans women, and that edits made by women are more likely to be reverted than by men. If you want to know more about this, you can read about the gender bias or the racial bias on Wikipedia. There's quite a bit of material already within the project, but it's both quantitative and qualitative. So this example from the New York Times from 2011 talks about friendship bracelets, which has had like a little stub, a little paragraph of an article, compared to baseball cards, which might have like entries for individual cards or a much longer, like long form essay for the material. But in sciences, it's equally problematic. So I come from the world of arts, but I wanted to bring in this particular example. So if you go to the page for women in STEM fields, you have this image of Inoamura Ugarte, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And it talks about the lack of reporting and like the difficulties, first of all, the difficulties for women in sciences, but also the lack of reporting on women in sciences. But then if you go to the image, yes, there's an image of this person. Yes, there's therefore a Wikidata entry, which is fantastic, but there is no English page for this person. However, there is a page in Basque and one in Spanish. So there's no reason why it shouldn't link out to those pages or to that data. And so there's just like already a bias within the material itself, that there's a lack of reporting there. So one of the great things about that page is it shows that there is an entry for her. It shows an image, but it's unfortunate because it has her name, but it's linked to the article, Lack of Women in STEM, as opposed to being a standalone for her and then linking out to women in STEM. Does that make sense? So if you are working in, if you're working in on this project and you want to include images, it's unlikely that you're going to like drive or fly to Borneo right now and take some photos, but there's probably images that you can be sourcing to add to the commons, either because they're open source and available on Google right now, or because you already have them in your personal collections. So you're adding them into the commons. We'll talk about how to do that. And we have to remember that both Wikidata and Wiki Commons contain the same bias with regards to whose images are included and what those images represent. So searching for images, when you are looking for something on Wikipedia or Wiki Commons, more specifically, you can type in the name and hopefully a series of images will pop up. But you'll notice that if you look for example, dog, you'll see dogs that are common to North America first, as opposed to dogs that are common around the world. And this is true across subject matter. There is some amount of structured data in Wikipedia, but it's rather slow. So when you're entering new images into the common, you want to be really clear with your naming. So a local transport system, and Navargo is a great name because it describes and then it allows you to find it easily. But if you just put on MZI at CS, you will never, ever, ever find this image. You will never know what it's for. Most of us will use the upload wizard, which is like the same as entering any other file into Google or whatever. It's just a drag and drop. So there's only a handful of licenses that interact with Wiki Commons. They're all the ones listed here. Oh no, my internet connection is unstable. Please let me know if I cut out by, I guess, emailing me. But you choose the one you want. I don't know if any of you have worked with the Commons before, but it's a nonprofit organization that overcomes legal obstacles to the sharing of knowledge and to creatively address the world's pressing challenges. It's been around since 2001. And the important things to think about when choosing a license is you want to think about the attribution, whether you want to be named or not, whether you want your name associated with it, how you want it to be sent to the owner. In this case, you want it to be non-commercial because you don't want people to be able to extract this information and use it for commercial purposes. You have to decide whether you want derivative works or not. So that might be that somebody can like riff on your project. They can change the color scheme. They can change the dimensions of it. And then share alike refers to sharing for similar purposes. So for example, I put a share alike license on this PowerPoint. You're welcome to share it. You must give you attribution. So then I want to talk about red linking. When we are looking at your user pages and also the user page of that user on the Concordia page, there were some red links. A red link refers to a page that should be on Wikipedia but doesn't exist yet. But it's also a tactic that you can use to include information on this platform when you don't necessarily have the material to begin yet, either because you don't have that knowledge or because that knowledge isn't available yet. So it serves as a clear indication of something that needs creation. There's a handful of projects that link all of those red links. So for example, Women in Red does not just work in the arts, it works across disciplines, and it amalgamates all the red links onto one page by discipline. So if you clicked on the Women in Red page, what it would bring you to is lists of like women in academics, librarians, women in STEM, whatever, and you would go through all their names. It also includes not just people, but occasionally subjects that might be missing. And then it will have edit-a-thons on a monthly basis by subject area, but you're always welcome to create your own to go through some of those red links and turn them blue. Once they're blue, it means they have a Wikipedia page. In French, there's a similar project called Les 100 Pages, and there's projects across language areas. So then the probably fastest growing part of Wikipedia is the Wikidata, which is central storage for structured data. I am not a librarian and I am not a Wikidata expert, but I'll talk you through it a bit. So what it does is it shows you, for example, this is an asteroid that has this like very, very banal name of 71248, etc. And then it tells you what this is. So it is an asteroid. It tells you like the history. If you go down on the page, it might tell you like who spotted it, people that are associated with it, etc., etc. It's just data points. But these data points are important on their own. So if you don't have enough material to create a Wikipedia page, but you have enough material to know, for example, in the case of a person that you want to add to Wikipedia, where they were born, what their gender is, what they're notable for, any one of those data points, you can start inputting it into Wikidata. And that serves as a basis for somebody to later go and create an entry. What's especially exciting is that it works across the language projects. So it works if you're working on English Wikipedia and you click on the data point on the page, it will bring you to this Wikidata entry. But if you were working in Basque or you were working in Mandarin, it would bring you to the same Wikidata entry. And last but not least, I want to show you the content translation tool. So in this particular example that I gave earlier, there was a Basque page and there was a Spanish page. And with the content translation tool, which is beta, you can click over the whole page so it contains the original formatting, all the references, because references don't have to be in the language you're working in, they can be in any language. And it allows you to rebuild the page with your own translation input. So you're still translating the language. It's important to know that you have to have a certain amount of edits and a certain amount of time on Wikipedia to be allowed to edit, especially into English. So if you're not an experienced editor, they're going to usually ask you to pair up with somebody or to make the suggestion for the edit without doing it yourself, or you'll just have to wait. So that is the really quick run through of how Wikipedia works. But now we're going to talk about more generally how we're going to organize today. So Sarah, maybe it would be good if you had a mic at this point so that we can discuss all together.
There's a mic. I can pass it to anyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing and make this really big so I can see you all. All right. The best way to go about group editing is to divide into teams. So some of you have probably had more experience editing on Wikipedia up to now. You can decide as a group if it makes more sense for you to be the ones writing or for you to be the ones supporting new writers. I would want some of you looking for images. So that could be one team. I'd like some of you looking for sources. I know that you probably already have a list of sources, but I would like a group to be working on that. And then another group working on inputting it into Wikidata, because Wikidata is a great place to store sources for people who might be adding it to other projects. So if this particular subject is like one page, there might have linked pages. Another group will be going on Wikipedia, and I assume you're all working on English Wikipedia today, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So looking to see if there's places to link out to, so to create blue links and also red links into other projects. So, you know, if we're working on Borneo, then an obvious blue link is Borneo. But if there's people related to this project that you'd want to be creating red links for, that will be another group. I think groups of like 2 for the research is the best, but groups for writing might be like up to 5. So I'm here to support. I'm here until like for 20 minutes. But how would you like to go about it? Do you have questions for me?
Does anyone have specific questions for Amber? Because I can bring the mic. We have a Google Doc page for the class that that everybody has a link to, that has some references already in it and a few obvious articles that we can link to that exist, although not the red links, just sort of existing article links. We talked about maybe doing an additional, at least a stub for Mutangarud, who's the activist who presented at our class and has quite a lot of published information about his life available as well. So, I mean, maybe we could have a couple of people who take on doing a small biography page on Mutang that can link to the main page we're creating too. Does that seem reasonable?
It seems reasonable to me. I mean, you're 16 today, correct?
There's 14 students in the class. This is Ivan, who's volunteered to help with problem solving.
Hi, Ivan.
And yeah, there's 14 students and me and Ivan. So.
Okay, great. So then I would say maybe 4 students can be working on that stub article.
Okay.
And the rest can be focused on the main article. And then you'd still want to, in both groups, be thinking about the external links, so the red linking and blue linking out, the Wikidata piece, so adding and creating a Wikidata entry, which is not hard. You just, you follow there's like almost like a wizard. You just click and then you add the points in. It's much simpler than doing a query, which we didn't do today, and it's really not my specialty.
Here has used Wikidata yet.
Do you want to look at it together? I can share my screen with.
That would be great if you could show us that.
Give me a sec. It's not so scary. I just I'm a wuss. And I don't like using Wikidata because I normally have to do the query part and it just stresses me out. The
And
query
Amber,
is when you're searching information.
what should we be adding to Wikidata? Should we be
Yeah,
adding
so
our
for the like the point of the biography, you're creating like the person's name. Well, okay, so you start with the highest point of information. They are an example of a human. Then you put in, following from the highest point of information down, what are they? They're an activist. They're an activist that works in what? They're an activist that works where? Thinking about it sort of like in that first grade English writing class, the who, what, where, why, when. Those are the points that you're thinking about adding to Wikidata, things that might be helpful to a general audience. But you're also able to put in references and link to other pages. You're also able to put in a person's name in the various languages that it might appear. So this might not be relevant to this particular project, but if a person has a name that might have many aliases or is in a different language and has therefore a different writing system, all of this is something that you can add to Wikidata.
So we would need to add this to Wikidata before we started writing anything about Mutang?
No, you can start with the Wikipedia page, but you could have one person or like two people working on adding Wikidata material.
Okay.
If I don't know if you did this, but if you have a photo of the person, then you can add that to the comments. So an example would be if you did a guest lecture with them, you could have taken a photo with permission.
Yeah, I have a photo of him and I have his permission to use it.
Fantastic. So you can add that to the comments.
Okay.
And then that commons image could be linked to Wikidata and then put onto the stub article as well. The more material there is about any subject or person on the various sister projects of Wikipedia, the more likely it is that that article will stick because it demonstrates that there's a need for this information.
Okay, good.
And for some reason in science, this is particularly difficult in the same way it is for art. Anything that, like, in quotations, is contentious, it is not, or is very rarely contentious to add any material to like pop culture. So if you were all really psyched about like a song or a singer, it would be very easy to add that data. But anything that is outside of that, it's very difficult.
So we may find that our topic of Indigenous rainforest blockades in Borneo is going to fall into that more contentious category.
Yes, I think it's definitely going to fall into a contentious category because, for example, when you write about why it's happening, well, there's going to be more than one determinant of, or more than one determiner of why it's happening.
Yeah.
More than, people are going to have opinions. The opinions are not necessarily based in fact, but I think you'll find that the secondary source production impacts how you're going to be able to write about it. So if it's been written about predominantly from the position of people who oppose the activism, then that is going to be reflected in how you can write the Wikipedia article, because you can't write anything that doesn't have a secondary source that backs up your claim.
I think it's actually more likely to be the other side, where most of what we have is published material that, like the, this, I don't know if you can see.
I can't see anything. No, I can see you're holding something, but it looks like a book.
It's called Money Logging on the Trail of the Asian Timber Mafia. So this book has a particular interpretation and take on what's going on. But there's facts too, like 90% of the rainforest is gone over the course of my lifetime. And, that's just a fact. It's gone.
Yeah. And also that fact might be backed up in other sources as well.
Yeah.
So that will be really helpful to look at, because you want to have a variety of sources when you're adding material. You don't want to rely too heavily on one, especially if there might be like perceived bias in that one publication.
No, and we have various journal articles that have been published in Nature Communications and Scientific Reports and other peer-reviewed journal sources too. So,
okay.
My other question for you actually was, in terms of organizing the article, do you have any advice for this, like how to decide on a format for a good article in Wikipedia that will stick?
Yeah, so I think a common strategy that people like to use is to borrow from a pre-existing strong page. So to find a subject that's similar, and you can either literally go and copy the code and drag it over and change the data points, or you can just use the headings if that's easier for you and you know how to insert the headings and the tables if that's relevant. Otherwise, I find that the best way to start with is with an overview, and then to go into the history of something, and then current realities. So I would say that that's useful for the page about the logging, but it's maybe less useful for a biography. There are a series of templates on Wikipedia. So if you were to search wiki template biography, for example, you would come up with a list of popular types of biography templates that might be more relevant if the person is like in performing arts or is an activist or is an academic, because it contains the types of things that you'd want to include.
Great, thanks. Does anyone have a specific question for Amber? I don't need to be the only one talking here, so.
You're all so quiet. Oh, good, thank you.
I was hoping you could run down your recommendation on what groups we should be. I'm just trying to take it down. You said it's someone on images, research, input onto Wikipedia. What other groupings of humans do we need for this?
Okay, so one group, think about the Wikidata piece. One group, think about the commons piece. One group, think about research for the article, because it sounds like you have some done already, but there's always a possibility of more. And another group could be looking at and it could be the same group, but it could be somebody who's also doing Wikidata or Commons. They can be interrelated, but looking at the red and blue links out from your article. So think of the project like a web, and you want all the pieces to be connected, but they all have different points. It's like a little network. It's a connected network. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. You can see my little hand gestures and they're making sense to you. I'm glad.
I'm not. Oh, okay. There you go. I'm not sure if I missed it, but could you show us an example of how to link Wikidata data onto a Wikipedia article?
Yeah.
Because at the moment, it seems like we're building two separate things.
You are building two separate things. You're building the Wikidata, and then you're building the Wikipedia page, but I'll show you how they connect. So first of all, let me show you how you create a new item on Wikidata. So is it showing? No, share. So you're going to go on Wikidata and you're going to be in special new item. So you can just click in here and write special new item. And it should, we don't want to search for a page. We want to just actually create it. And so you're creating an article. What language you're creating it in originally, we're going to do it in English. And then you're going to add in the information. So label, you put in the person's name, description, activist from Borneo, etc., aliases, and you'd want that to be like if the person has other names, etc. You'd click on create, and then you'd add in the separate points. Let's pick everybody's favorite entry. We're going to pick one of the 7,000 cats articles. Okay, so this is an item for cats, and you can see the different points. So like English, it's a house cat, also domesticated feline, also known as, and even the emojis are included. There's different statements. Well, what is it in Latin? What is it a reference to? How long have we known about cats? Whatever, images of cats. This gets like very high level because there's items for particular cats around the world, like not just cat species, but particularly famous cats that you can go to. But this is just a reference to the common house cat. You get a sense of all the things that people have put in. Cats are a very popular article or data point to work on because people universally love them. And so there's a lot of information here, but like I am in the Commons. And this is what happens when you click on me. It just says I'm a human, I'm a Wikimedian. It has my username. It says when I was a Wikimedian. There's not a lot of material. So it gives you like the two ends of the spectrum. If you want to look at cats on Wikipedia. So we're an English language Wikipedia. We're going there really quickly. So if you are on here and you scroll down, you can see, first of all the languages that it's available in. Cats are super popular. You can also see the different projects. So you can like go to comments and see all the cats. And then if you click on Wikidata item, it will bring you here back to the house cat. So they sort of link naturally. Does that make sense?
I guess my question was rather, is building the Wikidata entry helpful in creating the Wikipedia article? For example, maybe putting stuff into the data then allows us to easily incorporate it in the visual editor to put some properties there, or are those things really unrelated?
It can be helpful for the table. So the Wikidata helps you populate the table. So for example, this is a table, this like picture of cat, list of conservation status, et cetera, that's being populated by Wikidata, not exclusively from the article. It's not pulling the information out. At the end of the day, what you're doing with the Wikidata is creating a separate, it's like a separate project that's allowing you to work across languages and contain more information that might not be able to put into the Wikipedia page. For example, in the instance of the activists that you're working on, you might know pieces about this person that don't have secondary source points to link to in a Wikipedia article, and therefore are not appropriate to put in. But if you know that they were born in X village or X city, then you can put that in, even if there's no secondary source article that proves it. So it's allowing you to store information that might later be included in a Wikipedia article. And maybe it could be included in a Wikipedia article in a different language if you could then later find that information, but you yourself aren't fluent in that language and able to find it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
And another thing I wanted to ask was, for the statements on Wikidata, are the property types given to editors as a dropdown? Is it easy to find what properties you'd like to add to a Wikidata
Yes.
entry?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's well, first of all, it's like, let's say you want to know like property instance of highest order. Are they a cat? Are they a biological organism? That is not generally a drop-down menu. You're putting it in. It's think of it more like hashtagging. You're putting it in as you know it intuitively. You're putting the information that is available to you. And other people, this is collaborative also, other people are going to add in what they know about this subject. So to go back to cats, my limited knowledge of cats, because I don't have a cat, might be limited to like what I have in the 4 books in front of me. This is just like a very vague example, but you might be a real expert on cats in your area and be able to provide more information. Think of it like that.
Okay. Anybody else has any questions?
Hi again. I was wondering if you could elaborate or maybe repeat, in case I missed it, the about image searching. What images can we put, as long as we're linking it appropriately? Can we just put any image that we find on Google?
No.
That's what I
No.
thought.
So it has to be an open source image. It has to have the right, for example, Creative Commons license associated with it. Let's do a quick Google image search together. So we're gonna look up cats again, and we're gonna look at images of cats. So there are many, many, many thousands of images of cats. And we're gonna go into tools, usage rights, and you want Creative Commons licenses. You don't want these to be commercial, because then they have a commercial license. If it's Creative Commons, it will be shareable. So you go in here and you'll see there's fewer images, but in the case of cats, there's still tons. Sarah, do you mind if I search your name? I can't hear
Yeah,
you.
go ahead.
Okay. So I don't know if any of these are you. I don't think so. In the first, here you are. That's
Yeah, the
you,
horrible one there in the middle with the camera.
but with really great hair. So, best hair out of all of them. So here's a bunch of images for Sarah Turner's of the world. If you go into tools, usage rights, Creative Commons, you'll see that it becomes much more limited as to what's available. So the first line disappeared because they have commercial licenses on them. So then you have to look through what's available and see if any of them match your actual subject. As you can see in the case of Sarah Turner, there's maybe more than one of you in the world. And so you'll have to make sure you're using the appropriate material. Once you're extracting an image from here, you have to have permission to put it on. You can't just drop something into the comments. If you took the photo, there's no problem. But if somebody else took it, the best practice is for them to put the image themselves or to have a written permission to include it. So an example of that might be that you are in an archive and you find material related to this particular activist. So not the image that you took in class, that's totally fine, but an image that you find of them in an archive. And I took the photo. I was there, I took the photo, and you want to put it on, and I don't want to put it on the comments myself. I don't know how to do it. I'm 90 years old and it's not appealing to me to learn. All you need from me is a written permission that you can use the image in this context. When I say written permission, the way that Wikipedia works is that it's based in, well, the Wikimedia Foundation is based in the US. And so it's beholden to both like international copyright laws in general, but specifically US copyright laws around image protections. And so they will want a physical letter, not an email, a physical letter giving permission. And then I will have to provide proof of that when it's uploaded. And so you go through a process where you're demonstrating to the volunteers who manage this that you have the rights to this image. But if you're able to click on, I took this image is mine, then you can bypass that. Does that answer the question? That was a long answer.
Yeah, so if I understand it correctly, it's not like we wouldn't necessarily be able to today, right this second, upload a bunch of images. We'd have to go one by one and obtain physical permission for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if you happen to have a bunch of images, so let's imagine that as part of this class, you went to this logging site. It was like a field trip that you all took and you all took images. Those are images that you could include. There's really common activities to do these like photo hunts. So you go and on Wikipedia, you go and take photos of a subject area. You're not going to Borneo with this class, but that could have been something that was done, or you could work with a group there to take the photos that you're looking for.
Sounds very complicated. Thank you.
It is really complicated. International copyright is really complicated.
But there may be images available through the Creative Commons that are just that we can then use.
Yes, possibly. And then you might still need to, if you need the attribution, then you might still need the permission.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know how to spell Borneo logging would be maybe.
Yeah.
So here's a bunch of images. And if I click on, right. So there's a handful of images already in the Commons. So these are also great tools that you can link out to the article that you've created.
Yeah, so these ones are, you're finding them on Google, then we could click on the image, get the link to it and put it in our article because it's already in the Wikipedia. That
Yeah,
was
you could search the
Commons.
Commons like directly, but if you're looking for more widely images, this is a good place to start. So
great. Thanks.
Yeah, long-winded answer.
So if we had a couple people look for images, maybe 3 students who focused on sourcing, a group of 4 to write the main article, and 2 students doing a red links, blue links search, and maybe 3 doing a short article on Mutang. Does that sound like those are the notes I have from your suggestions. I just wanted to see if that sounds about right.
That sounds good for me. Does it sound good for you all? Y'all are the ones who are doing it.
Yeah.
One like yes movement, 2 thumbs up in the back. I like that. Thank you. All the people that way I can't see, so I'm just assuming that you're consenting. I'm doing the like thing you shouldn't do on Wikipedia that assumes silence is consensus, but
So one last technical question. I did the Wiki Edu training on group projects, but I am still a little vague about how we can share a sandbox.
I don't think you should do that.
But if I create a sandbox,
yeah, you can, my understanding is like tag people into it. I don't do this because I find it easier to work off of Wikipedia. I find it easier to work in like a shared document because it provides this trace. So if you go and make the article, if you move it from a draft into the public and it's immediately deleted for whatever reason, you still have all that knowledge conserved.
okay.
It's
So if
it's
I
a bit
set up-
easier to do the work.
Like if we use my computer, for example, then we just could, you mean do it in my sandbox and then
You can all do it in one sandbox, but you can also all start the work in off of Wikipedia and then move
like
it
in
together.
a Google Doc, and
Yeah.
then move that into
Yeah.
the sandbox, and
Yeah,
then
there's nothing that obliges you.
okay.
Yeah.
Wiki
The only-
Edu is really big on us all working in our sandboxes at all
I-
times. So
I strongly believe that you should start in the sandbox for any article you create, but you don't have to start in the sandbox. You can start anywhere and move it to anywhere off of Wikipedia, move it to the sandbox, do some work there, like all the linking. You can do the linking outside of the sandbox and then move it from the sandbox into the draft and public mode. But I think that the idea that you have to begin in the sandbox is not necessarily very helpful. And I don't think that they would disagree that you have to begin your project there. But one helpful thing with working in the sandbox is if you're working with the dashboard, and I know your class is, it helps to see who's working on what, and it helps to see how many characters you've inputted, etc. So if that's useful for your project, once you move it into the sandbox, that data will be collected.
Okay, sounds good. Does anyone else have a question for Amber? I see Anna back on screen.
Well, just because I'm conscious of Amber's time and I'm just paying attention to that, Amber. I don't know if you have to.
I can do like 7 more minutes.
Okay.
And I also want to apologize for my really stuffy nose. We've all been
apologies
taken down this
necessary.
week.
We all really appreciate you coming today.
And we got through the whole thing without a child bursting through half naked. So you're all really lucky. Consider yourselves blessed.
Does anyone else have a question for Amber? Burning general Wikipedia question, today question?
If not, you can email me.
Okay.
Well, it's great that you're willing to share your PowerPoint with the class, Amber, and of course we do have the live stream recording as well that the students can refer back to, because there's probably a lot of information to take in very quickly.
Yeah, 1 hour is quick.
It's funny because during your presentation there was a lot of people listening outside here and watching as well. So
Oh well, they're just going to be totally lost. They've only got partial information. They won't even get the PowerPoint. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. If you do have questions, you can email me. It's just my name at Gmail. You can be in touch at any point. You can share it with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I will do so.
Okay, on behalf of the whole class, we really want to thank you for your time and for helping us with this project, Amber. Thanks so much.
No problem. Nice to meet you all. Good luck. Bye.
Bye, Amber. Take care. Thank you so much.